Jim's Golden Rules. Continued. Quote, sweat the small stuff, because the small stuff will inevitably turn into big stuff someday. Unquote. One of my past employers used to always say, don't sweat the small stuff. He was wrong. More often than not, that small stuff will eventually turn into big stuff. Those few leaves burning at the curb will become a forest fire before long. Maybe it was something you said, something you did, or something you neglected to do when you should have. Don't ignore, avoid, or set it aside. Deal with it head on, no matter how insignificant it may seem today. Then move on to the next hornet's nest with a clear mind. Otherwise, you may have to live with the consequences of your inaction forever. Back in the 70s, I drove a wreck of a car. While driving boys to games on 2 consecutive days, a weekend and about 16 hours apart, I got 2 tickets. They were 2 silly tickets. Not for speeding or going through a stop sign or red light, but silly tickets. One was for unknowingly not having a license plate on the front of my car. It fell off somewhere, as everything was falling off that car. And the second for not taking the car to motor vehicle inspection within 30 days of registration. They were 2 penalties that I don't believe even matter in New Jersey today. I put the 2 tickets in my glove compartment and forgot about them. I received multiple notices in the mail over the next 9 months, but I ignored them. I was busy, working full-time and tending to my young hockey players in my spare time. One night, I was stopped by a New Jersey state trooper and discovered that I had been placed on the state's revoked driver's list for not paying these 2 $35 tickets. I got another ticket for driving on the revoked list that night, compounding the problem. I paid the $70 in fines the next day and paid another $330 7 months later in a court appearance for the revoked list ticket. 3 months after that, the hammer dropped. For pleading guilty to driving on the revoked list, my license was automatically suspended for 180 days for not paying 2 silly tickets. But that was the law, and I disobeyed it. I was 24. I was already a good mentor, but lacked wisdom. I was too caught up with my busy life to worry about the small stuff. The result of that indiscretion was my not being able to drive for 6 months. It impacted the lives of 2 youngsters, one severely, and it still affects my life today. I'll never forgive myself for letting that happen. I haven't gotten many tickets in the past 4 decades, but I have since paid them all the same day. Too little too late, though. The damage was done long ago. Make time to deal with the small stuff. We'll address that next. They're usually quick and easy to resolve. Get them out of the way so they don't come back to bite you in the butt later. The hurt they may potentially create by ignoring them can last a very long time and possibly affect the lives of others. Quote, beware of time bandits. Time is not infinite. Each day has a beginning and an end. Manage accordingly, and you will have time for everything. Unquote. Everyone is so busy these days. They're late for everything, driving aggressively, and always rushing to get things done. Trying to multitask doesn't work. Doing 2 tasks half as well is not a good thing, especially for brain surgeons. The mom walking her tyke in a stroller across a busy street against the light while chatting on her phone, or the people who do their job half as well in half the time, leaving you hanging with a half-filled cup of coffee without a lid, so they can get back to replying to that last Instagram message. If you put the brakes on for a minute, though, and thought about where all that time goes in a day, you might just find a way to get everything done, and with time to spare. Before the technological revolution of the 90s, people were still busy. I know I was. We just had fewer choices of time bandits. I managed to find the time just about every day to get everything done, while still learning at least one new thing. Okay, maybe I don't get everything done, but at least the important things, the big rocks. I've tried to make it a habit to never disappoint anyone. Everything in your life should be prioritized: kids, family, significant other, work, health, education, friends, hobbies, face to face socializing, and all the rest. It all needs to be reset every day because no 2 days in life are alike. Look for those time bandits: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Netflix, Hulu, YouTube, eBay, network TV, Xbox, PlayStation, and so on. Then ask yourself, are some of these things more important than my kids, my significant other, my family, my job, my health, my education? Note, if you answered yes, then you better go back and read page 2 of this book again. Notice that I didn't include friends in that last question. Like most people, I love my friends, and some are more like family than, well, my family. But they are still tier 2. If you do manage to fit in some time bandits on a limited controlled basis, I'm sure your friends will be a part of that. Hobbies, socializing, and all the rest will be trade-offs between those time bandits and some things you may love to do. There are some hard choices. When I was unemployed for 25 months after I shut down my packaging business, I found things to occupy my time. Aside from scrolling through job listings every day, mailing resumes, and going to interviews, I started to write for a tech website. I had been a frequent reader and commenter to several mobile websites for about a year. The person who ran one of the sites asked if I wanted to be an unpaid writer. I wasn't sure if I had the skills, but I did publish a youth hockey newspaper for a decade. At one point, I was writing multiple articles a day, and anything I wrote about had to be researched and validated, which took time and sometimes several hours per article. Then there was Twitter, followed by Facebook, then Netflix. Suddenly, my days and nights were full, and I didn't have a job. Once I was working again, I needed to start weaning myself off these bad habits. One by one, I have cut back or cut off these time bandits. I do miss writing those tech articles, though. That was kind of fun. You need to find balance to make time for everything and everybody. It may seem impossible some days, but it's not. Like giving up smoking or overeating, you can control the dark hole that time bandits suck you into. Some may need to go cold turkey. Others may have the willpower to cut back and manage. That's a decision you'll have to make. It will give you more time to take care of the important things in your life. Finally, notice I put kids in the front of both lists. That wasn't a coincidence. Quote, "Trust can be earned or perceived, or washed away in an instant. Protect your reputation by always doing the right thing." Unquote. Trust is a fragile thing. You could spend your whole life building it up, and then it can be washed away in an instant with one little mistake. It's important that you protect that trust by always doing the right thing, as trying to rebuild it can be difficult and sometimes impossible. In the early 70s, when I was working as a skate guard at that city sports complex, I occasionally slept overnight at the rink on weekends. It was about 8 miles from my house, and I was barely 16, so not yet driving. It took 2 buses to get home and 2 to get back, and at least an hour each way. On weekends, I needed to open the building at 6:30 a.m. for hockey rentals, so sleeping there was a lot easier for me. Late one Saturday afternoon, a mom came in with her 12-year-old son. I knew the boy well. She explained that her husband, the boy's father, had been drinking that day, and he sometimes got nasty. The mom asked if her boy, who was a tad small for his age, could sleep at the rink that night after the youngster told her that I sometimes stayed there myself. Of course, I said yes. I showed her where her son would count sheep on a comfortable cot in our first aid room. She thanked me and walked back to her apartment. The boy got a good night's sleep after some late night skating, and everything worked out fine. That mom trusted me with the safety and welfare of her son that day. It had only been 7 months since the building opened, so no one knew each other all that well. But most everyone knew that I could be trusted because I always did the right thing. In the 80s, we had a hockey road trip down to Washington, D.C. with that all-star program I had put together. There were 2 Pee Wee, age 11 and 12, games scheduled for that weekend. The first game on Saturday afternoon would be played at the old Washington Capitol Center in Landover, Maryland, before the NHL contest between the New Jersey Devils and Washington Capitals. So, it was kind of a big thing, but we had a dilemma. This was an all-star program, so every player was a part-timer. That weekend, not a single Pee Wee goaltender from my long list of phone numbers was available to leave New Jersey for both days. They all had at least one league game that weekend. With a few days to go and not having a solution, one of our parents suggested a boy he had seen play from South Jersey. He was only 11, but not a bad goaltender. I asked the parent to set things up. I drove down to Washington in my van early Saturday with my 2 coaches and another boy who would be staying with me. I met the mom and youngster on the way down in the lobby of an ice rink near their home. We had never met and didn't even know each other's names. After a little chit-chat, we were on our way. I told her I would take good care of her son and not to worry. The parent from our team had given me a good endorsement when he talked to her, and the boy was really pumped up to be making the trip. So, the mom was reasonably confident things would work out. Of course, they did. We even had a couple New Jersey Devils players visit us in the locker room after our game and before theirs. That was a real thrill for the kids. That mom, a good mom, entrusted her precious child to a stranger for the weekend based on the word of someone she only knew casually. But my reputation was beyond reproach, and I worked hard to keep it that way. It's an important quality for a good mentor. Think of that the next time you're about to do something really dumb. Protect that reputation. Quote, learn to understand and feel empathy. Put yourself in someone else's shoes. It will make you a better, more caring person. Unquote. I have always been an empathetic person. Heck, I think I even teared up a bit the first time watching Elliot see E.T. dying on screen. So, I didn't have to learn empathy. Working at that city sports complex as a teen, I got to meet a bunch of kids. Some who didn't have all that much, and even less to look forward to. We talked often, as I wanted to hear their stories of how they lived, so I could put myself in their shoes. It helped me to better understand them and explain why they did certain things. I cut them breaks sometimes knowing their situation and paid for things without them realizing when they couldn't. Some people, especially kids, are not responsible for their circumstance. During my 30 years in contract packaging, our plants were mostly staffed by minimum wage and temporary employees. In the 80s, it was mostly black women in northern New Jersey, shifting in the 90s to a more Hispanic population in central New Jersey. Some had husbands and families, but many were single mothers with kids at home and were collecting public assistance, which was offset by the meager wage we were paying them. They all showed up for work every day, though, bright and cheery. I tried, but had a hard time thinking about living in their shoes, even for a day. There were stories of sick children needing specialized treatment, shootings, school stabbings, in just about anything you could imagine in a third world country, yet in New Jersey. It was overwhelming at times. I remember a longtime employee calling one morning to say she wouldn't be in that day because her apartment building burned to the ground the night before. She and her kids lost everything, but got out without injury. The woman apologized and said that she would try to make it in the next day after she got her kids settled somewhere. The woman was afraid that she would lose her job. Our plant manager, one of my mentors, assured her that would never happen and told her to call if she needed absolutely anything. He was mobilizing others to help this woman and her children minutes after getting off the phone. All those people, many of them friends, respected me and I respected them while empathizing with their situations. In the early 90s, the owner of one company, Mr. Scrooge, canceled the Christmas party that we had the past 10 years on the plant floor. It was always the afternoon before shutting down for the holiday and had some catered food and music and occasionally some dancing. It was the only thing that many of these people had to look forward to during the holiday season. When I found out about it that morning, I got permission from the plant manager to extend the lunch period for all the employees. I left work and set out to solve the problem, with triple-deckers from the deli, Pizza Stop, chicken and sides from Roy Rogers, the supermarket for drinks, tableware, and snacks. It cost me $300, and I wasn't making all that much back then, but I knew it was important to these workers. I gave everyone a Christmas party that year, defying and maybe embarrassing the owner just a bit. In the 2 subsequent years, I switched to chafing trays and gourmet delicacies that were catered. I did my best to make it special for everyone, as it was possibly the only Christmas joy for some of them. I didn't expect it, and it's not why I did it, but in return, I got unfettered cooperation the entire year from all those employees. Not everyone may be worthy of your empathy, though. Those who create their own situations, like when breaking the law, will need to work on or at least try to do the right thing before you may be willing to empathize with them. For those who are deserving, though, try to imagine living in their shoes. It will make you a more caring person. Quote, "Forgiveness is not a given. It must be earned." Unquote. Some people are going to disagree with the above rule, but it is logically correct. If forgiveness is a given, why would anyone worry about always doing the right thing or following any other rule or law? There must always be consequences. Toddlers have to deal with consequences when they act up. They're probably looking at a timeout. Why not everyone else? You'll read about this in the next section, but it's not until you identify your own shortcomings, take responsibility, and choose to correct them that anything will ever get better. How often do you hear people say, "I'm sorry"? Do they sincerely mean it, or has it become an overused term? Does everyone get instant forgiveness if they say, "I'm sorry"? No, they don't. I just finished reflecting on empathy, but at times I can be a rather difficult person to deal with. As an ISO 9000 lead auditor, I was taught to seek out the root cause of problems using objective evidence, following that up with corrective action. So, when someone says, "I'm sorry," after screwing something up, I respond, "That's not good enough. What corrective action are you going to take to ensure it doesn't happen again?" That usually results in, let me get the manager, generating another, "I'm sorry." But often the manager will admit that the process is flawed or that the employee has not had the proper training. The employee learns something new, the manager keeps me as a customer, and forgiveness is granted unconditionally. Without my intervention, the employee would just keep making the same mistakes and saying, "I'm sorry." Nothing would ever get better. Youngsters most often qualify for a pass with an I'm sorry, or showing remorse being all that's expected. But just like the store manager, it becomes an opportunity for a teaching moment. That's what good mentors do. Earlier, I related to the high school football player who sucker punched me in the face with a dog chain wrapped around his hand when I was 17. Obviously, it wasn't reactionary. It was something he had planned to do. I forgave him, though, not because he was black and I was white, and not because he said he was sorry. I did it because his mother pleaded his case for not wanting her son to be stuck in that dark hole called the city. She wanted him to have an opportunity for a better life. I respected that. I sure hope he told his mom he was sorry. Forgiveness should almost always be granted. We humans are a compassionate bunch, after all. But forgiveness may not always be granted until after the reason for needing the forgiveness in the first place has been resolved or at least addressed. Otherwise, we just keep going in circles chasing our tails. The last pages of this section provide an example of when forgiveness perhaps should never be granted. Quote, "Prejudice and racism can't be governed away. It needs to be learned. In the meantime, one may need to grow a thick skin." Unquote. I know, easy for an old white guy to say. A statement that is in itself discriminatory towards all old white guys. But it's logical and mostly true. It's a difficult subject, but I knew I had to include it as it's important to me in the way I've tried to live my life. My parents, born in the 20s, were children of immigrants and may have held some prejudice towards certain ethnicities, but they were far from being racist. They both had black friends at work that they talked about regularly, always in a positive light. But admittedly, those friends probably wouldn't have been invited to a family barbecue. One of my earliest mentors was a black man, a father figure, who managed a sports complex in New Jersey's largest city. When I was 17, I let a black kid who sucker punched me off the hook so he might have a chance for a better life. There were several black kids involved in hockey whom I drove to and from rinks in the 70s, just like everyone else. They were all equal in every way. I worked closely with dozens of black people through my 31 years in packaging, both on the plant floor and in the office, empathizing with some because of the difficult circumstances in which they had to live their lives. When I started my packaging business, we only hired 2 full-time employees, 2 black guys, managers, who we worked with for years. Finally, my musical mentor since I was 14 years old was Arthur Taylor Lee, a black man who made his mark as a rock musician in a somewhat hostile United States during the 60s and 70s. Meeting him in 2004 after a concert was like a religious experience for me. But if I were to use the N-word in a conversation, maybe talking about how black athletes, rap artists, and others use the word openly, I could be labeled a racist, yet most likely by another white person. That's crazy, and it's wrong, because actions speak louder than words. My nephew and his friends have close friends who are black. Each generation, the line that divides us by ethnicity grows thinner. It's going to take time to work itself out, though. Prejudice and racism can't be legislated away. In the meantime, one can't be oversensitive or make assumptions. That's unfair and can move the ball in the wrong direction. I started working for a new company in the early 90s, and one of the owners was Jewish. He also turned into one of my mentors, a good mentor. I had known some Jewish families during my youth hockey years, but they weren't really practicing Jews. No offense intended. Easier to say than people of the Jewish faith who did not strictly practice their religion. Their kids liked that they got to celebrate Christmas and Hanukkah, which meant more presents. The company had several Jewish employees, and maybe more than average, which was not in itself racist or discriminatory. Everyone was treated equally. I wanted to learn more about the Jewish faith so I wouldn't inadvertently offend someone. A purchasing agent, a Jew, became my Jewish education mentor. He had served in the Israeli military and was very open to conversation. Among other things, he taught me how to display and light the menorahs that I made sure we had in each of our plants during Hanukkah, as well as helping me out when I was invited to a Kaddish after the owner's mother passed away. Our IT manager was a practicing Orthodox Jew. He provided more tips on Judaism. For example, explaining the purpose and traditions of many of the Jewish holidays. When I started my own packaging business, one of our customers were Hasidic Jews, a father and son. They had black suits, hats, and beards, and I learned a few more things from them. I was never afraid to ask, as they knew I wasn't trying to be offensive in any way. The son was a teacher at a Hebrew school, so I knew I was getting accurate information. All these people I met and worked with over the years were equal in my eyes, although others may have looked at them and treated them differently. They all understood that and rolled with the punches, thick skin as needed. Shortly after September 11, 2001, I was back at the airport taking 2 or 3 trips a week. However, I no longer took naps on the plane and always insisted on an aisle seat. I was prepared to protect every person on my flight, regardless of the outcome, because it was the right thing to do. We were getting ready to open a new plant in Ontario, Canada, and I took a flight to Toronto for a couple days. I got back to the airport for the return and made my way to the security line in the terminal. When it was my turn to pass through the metal detector, I was surprised to see a team of 4 tall men on the other side, all slightly dark-skinned, wearing something like white casual suits, with turbans on their heads, Sikhs. I was a little concerned, but didn't say anything. When I got home that night, I got on the internet and educated myself. They were a peaceful people that may appear a little different. On multiple subsequent trips through Toronto, I always made it a point to say thank you after passing through security, which usually resulted in an obligatory head bow. Racism and prejudice is more a lack of education and information than anything else. One of our purchasing agents was Pakistani. The map of Pakistan was painted across his facial features, but he was born in the USA and couldn't speak a sentence in Urdu if his life depended on it. He was a well-spoken, funny guy. He told me how he, his wife, and young twins were harassed and discriminated against in the months after 9/11. Some of what he told me was unnerving, but he had developed a thick skin long before due to his appearance, although he still worried about his family. I have always tried to treat all people fairly, but I would be lying if I told you I wouldn't feel a bit uncomfortable if I was walking alone and there were a group of young black males nearby. I can still feel that punch in the chair breaking across my back. If a dog bites you for no reason, you probably won't be reaching out to pet every dog you see. At least not until the tail wagger, or the people you may feel uncomfortable around, are vetted. That's human nature. It has nothing to do with prejudice. I had a mechanic, an older Polish guy, who worked for me in the early 80s. He came to the United States when he was 16. He absolutely despised Russians for the way his family was treated and the way his relatives were still being treated under Soviet rule. It didn't make it any easier when I hired a guy from Kazakhstan, a single father with a young daughter, who learned English by reading Catcher in the Rye dozens of times. They eventually found a way to get along. Old prejudices are hard to erase. It takes time and sometimes vetting for reassurance. That's not being racist. It's being careful and getting comfortable with an understandably uncomfortable situation. We all should consider not being so sensitive and taking every word spoken personally. Diversity is the spice of life. Get to know other cultures and ethnicities as we all come closer together every day. One common world. Nothing can stop that. Quote, Respect for one another is not mutually exclusive, although it may require some give and take from both parties." Unquote. I struggled to find an anecdotal story that would best describe respect. After thinking about it, though, I realized that everything I've done and continue to do centers around this key quality. I conveyed respect to the players, parents, and volunteers I encountered throughout my 2 decades of involvement in youth hockey, and to those I've met through my various places of employment, coworkers, vendors, and clients. I've also worked hard at being respectful to waiters, clerks, technicians, law enforcement, and whomever. With rare exception, it resulted in people being mutually respectful. When I was a youngster growing up in the 60s, parents, including my own, had their own methods for teaching respect. It occasionally involved the shiny side of a belt or the back of a hand. Our society has mostly progressed from using those methods, but respect is still an important quality. It needs to be learned by everyone. I taught the youngsters I mentored to be respectful and to always act respectfully, explaining that by doing so, others would respect them. This rule was conveyed partly through words, but mostly through my actions, as actions speak louder than words and are much easier for inattentive kids to comprehend. For certain, respect is one of those things that can rub off on people. If you always do the right thing, you will earn the respect of others while helping them by example to become more respectful. Hockey players, from the youngest level to NHL professionals, will beat the hell out of each other in a championship game or playoff series. Once it's over, though, both teams will line up in orderly rows at center ice and shake each other's hand as a sign of respect. It's a tradition more than 100 years old. It's a beautiful thing to watch and teaches a very powerful lesson. You don't have to particularly like someone to respect them or their efforts. It's also a reminder that hockey, like all sports, is just a game. Even if you're not a hockey fan, be sure to turn on that Time Bandit in your living room during the Stanley Cup Finals, including the entire family in the experience. It's a teaching moment for certain. Some of those in our society today lack an understanding of respect. Finishing up a text message while driving, which you shouldn't be doing in the first place, at a 20-second green left turn signal after 18 seconds, and leaving a row of stuck cars behind you is not respectful. Nor is pushing your cart full of groceries through the express lane while someone is waiting behind you with a cello-wrapped sandwich and a drink on their 30-minute lunch break. It shows a lack of empathy for those around you, another value closely aligned with respect. There are many ways to demonstrate respect: being attentive when someone is speaking or performing, having a courteous regard for others' feelings, abiding by our laws and regulations which protect us all, or valuing the advice and counsel of a parent or good mentor. Respect should go both ways. You can't expect someone to respect your point of view, for example, if you don't respect theirs. That doesn't mean you can't have a healthy debate if your points of view differ. Agreeing to disagree is not necessarily a bad thing, provided you keep it respectable. It may sometimes be hard to respect someone who shows disrespect or aggression towards you. It might require lots of lip biting, and it could take some effort to earn that respect. If no one offers that hand, though, don't expect the situation to change on its own. Quote, "The world doesn't revolve around you. Don't expect things. Earn them." Unquote. Of course, for many parents, the world revolves around their children within their own personal worlds. That's expected and understood. It's often the sign of a good mentor. But once a youngster has transformed into an independent, free-thinking, responsible butterfly, they are ready to take on the real world. There are those amongst us who feel the world revolves around them and that the world owes them something. That's not how this works. Don't expect things to be handed to you. In the real world, there are no participation trophies. Those who work for their successes earn them. We all must stand in the same line and wait our turn. My first packaging job had me there 15 years. In that time, I was a line worker, line supervisor, shift supervisor, mechanic, chief mechanic, and plant engineer. I never expected these promotions. I showed up for work every day and tried my darndest to be the best I could. I learned something new, made incremental improvements, and tried to be better than the day before. Each new title earned me a little more in my check, along with the associated additional demands and responsibilities. My goal was to always be better than anyone else at what I did, regardless of what I was doing. That hard work and effort earned me the opportunity to trade in the uniform for a shirt and tie, and eventually have the title Vice President on my business card. These things all happened because of the confidence my employers had in me to always do the right thing, to treat their company as my own, and share responsibility for its continued success. No one owed me these promotions and career successes. I didn't expect them. I earned them through hard work. If you simply go through the motions and don't learn anything in school, that diploma is nothing more than a piece of paper. It may get your foot in the door, but afterwards, others will realize your real worth, and you'll soon be embellishing your resume to get your foot in still another door. That's not being honest with yourself. Don't expect things simply because you show up each day. Otherwise, you may be stuck on the same step of that success ladder for a very long time and will become what business likes to call dispensable. Earn the admiration and respect of your teacher, professor, or employer by working hard and trying to do better every day. Quote, "Shit or get off the pot. Procrastination steals your valuable time. Make up your mind and move on." Unquote. This was one of my father's favorite sayings or rules. He was not a procrastinator. Furthest thing from it. He got something in his head, and that was that. It was full steam ahead. He often got my brother and I, later just me, out of bed at 8 a.m. or earlier on a Sunday morning saying, "Get dressed, we're going for a ride." That's how I got to see the Baseball Hall of Fame in Cooperstown, New York. It was a 200-mile, 4-plus-hour trip with no preparation and no needless thought. He just filled the tank with gas and drove. We saw Ted Williams get inducted that day in 1966. I was 10 and my brother was 15. I suppose my father read it on the sports page at 7 o'clock that morning and made the decision in 10 minutes, which was a long time for him. Another morning when I was maybe 14, my father got me out of bed early on a Sunday to have breakfast at a cousin's house one town over. My dad had a habit of doing that, popping in unannounced and uninvited. Family always needed to make sure to have extra eggs and bacon around when he was alive. My aunt lived on the first floor of this house, while our daughter, my cousin, lived on the second floor with our husband and infant daughter. They had only recently moved in. On the second floor there was a center foyer, and then 4 doors leading into 4 rooms. The kitchen was one room, but it was too small to eat in, so there was a dining table 1 room over. You had to walk from the kitchen out to the foyer and then back into the dining room. Tiring. My cousin wished there was a pass-through between the 2 rooms. Her husband wasn't too handy at the time, so was reluctant to attempt the challenge. As we were finishing up breakfast, my father said, "Jimmy, go down to the basement and find a hammer and chisel, or something." I knew exactly what I was looking for. I had done plenty of home improvement projects with the old man on the spur of the moment. I got back upstairs, and he told me to start pounding the wall where my cousin wanted the door. It was a 1930s-era home, so it was all plaster and lath. I found the edges of 2 beams giving us a 30-inch opening. That was that. Before we left, the doorway was cut out and everything was cleaned up. He and I came back a few days later to add trim. My cousin was amazed and very pleased. It only took my father a few minutes to make that decision to tear into someone's house. We earned our breakfast that morning. My brother, on the other hand, was the eternal procrastinator. He could spend 3 or 4 years trying to decide what color to paint a wall and then often deciding on the original color. It would frustrate me when I flew to Florida to visit. We would sip cognac and have a cigar on his back porch while he procrastinated about the same projects we talked about 3 months or sometimes 3 years earlier. I would tell him, just make a decision already. You can always change it. But that wouldn't be enough to sway him. It was the same topics on the next visit. Groundhog Day all over again. Collecting all the facts and thinking something through thoroughly is a good thing. It allows you to weigh all the pros and cons and maybe get everything right the first time. But procrastinating over something wastes time and energy. I have procrastinated at times in my life, and it has cost me dearly. Just make up your mind and move on. You can almost always go back to square one and start over. Get on with it. You have more important things to do. Quote, 11 for Jacob. Be fair. Be kind. Be understanding. Be honest. Be thankful. Be a good sport. Be a good friend. Be joyful. Be generous. Be gentle with others. Be positive. Unquote. On October 22, 1989, a Sunday afternoon in rural Painesville, Minnesota, Jacob Wetterling, his younger brother, and best friend got on their bikes and rode into town to pick up a video to watch that night. On their way back, they were stopped on the road by a man brandishing a revolver. He had seen them earlier and was waiting for them. He ordered them to dump their bikes in a drainage ditch and asked each of them their name and age. He told Jacob's brother and the friend to run home. He handcuffed Jacob and put him in his pickup truck. Then he drove some 20 miles to an old stone quarry. There in a clearing, he ordered Jacob to undress in that cold October air, and he sexually assaulted him. After finishing his deed, the man saw a police car passing by on the road above and began to panic. He loaded bullets into his empty revolver, stood behind Jacob, and fired 2 shots into his head, ending the boy's life. Jacob was 11 years, 8 months, and 5 days old. The man buried Jacob's lifeless body at the site, and it would remain an unsolved mystery until September 1, 2016, when the man confessed to Jacob's murder and the rape of a 12-year-old boy 9 months before Jacob's abduction, in return for immunity from prosecution. Jacob's remains were positively identified September 3, 2016, nearly 27 years after his brutal murder, bringing his always hopeful family closure. Jacob's murderer, a monster in the real sense, is currently incarcerated in a federal prison for possession of child pornography and technically may never be released. But things sometimes change. Some in our society did not deserve forgiveness, regardless of your beliefs. I've been around long enough to know that about the time of Jacob's disappearance in 1989, along with a few other high-profile child abduction cases, there was a steady societal shift in America. No longer were kids taking long rides on their bikes, exploring the woods on their own, or even walking to a friend's house in the next development. They were instead being transported in minivans to organized activities or parked on the couch in the living room in front of a gaming console. Parents feared for their children's safety, pulling in the welcome mat and double bolting the doors. Today, face-to-face social interaction amongst preteens and teens, aside from spending time each day at school, has been replaced by cell phones and multiplayer video games, often depriving opportunities for mentoring outside the home. When they do participate in an activity, youth sports coaches, for example, often good mentors, have limited access to the youngsters due to a hands-off policy. They aren't permitted to have a private conversation offering counsel and advice to a kid who may be in conflict with a parent or have other concerns. Less than 1% of those amongst us are bad people, which limit the ability of the other 99% to do their job. That's sad and makes me angry. The kid is deprived of diverse mentoring, and good mentors are curtailed from sharing their wisdom. Some youngsters may have no access to mentors outside the home and are subjected to a single point of view from their parent or parents who may not have any or only modest mentoring skills. The pendulum is not expected to swing back anytime soon, which will make the mentor's job that much more difficult. I don't envy those who have to deal with today's challenges. Life was much simpler in the 70s and 80s. Jacob's parents established the Jacob Wetterling Resource Center, JWRC, now administered by Gunderson Health System, after Jacob's disappearance to educate and assist families and work with communities to prevent the exploitation of children. Jacob loved sports, playing soccer, hockey, and football. He dreamed of being a football player. Jacob believed in a fair and just world, a world where all children know they are special and deserve to be safe. The Resource Center created 11 for Jacob, inspired by schoolchildren. The movement centers around 11 simple traits that Jacob valued. Be fair, be kind, be understanding, be honest, be thankful, be a good sport, be a good friend, be joyful, be generous, be gentle with others, and be positive. I didn't know Jacob or his family, but I knew hundreds and mentored dozens of boys just like him during my 2-decade youth hockey tenure. So it's become personal for me. I spent those years protecting and keeping each of those kids safe because they were all special. Anytime I get stressed out, maybe when I'm stuck behind a driver on their cell phone going half the speed limit, I take a deep breath and silently recite 11 for Jacob. It calms me down. Give it a try for a week. Be sure to share 11 for Jacob with your children and grandchildren. For the record, every penny earned from the sale of this book is donated directly to the JWRC. I wouldn't have it any other way.